This is the Bartholomew Town Podcast.
Okay, so some fairly major developments in Rhode Island's 2022 gubernatorial race took place this week. Number one, Treasurer Seth Magaziner formally throwing his hat into the ring, and then also the optics of not taking reporters' questions immediately following his announcement presentation in Pawtucket. And then also Providence Mayor Jorge Elorza saying that he is not running for governor. So we're going to break that all down today with the Boston Globe's Dan McGowan. It's Bill Bartholomew here with you on Rhode Island's podcast of record, the Bartholomew Town Podcast, where you can listen on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, ripodcast.com, or wherever you like to listen to shows. And, you know, there's also other elements at play. We'll get to those with Dan. I've learned from a number of sources that I spoke with this week that there will be a progressive candidate, another progressive candidate that will be entering the race fairly soon. And then also, is there going to be a Republican candidate? So lots on the table, not to mention how all of this impacts other statewide elections that are coming up in 2022. If you'd like to support the independent journalism, entertainment, opinion, and analysis that B-Town has become known for, well, you can become a B-Town insider by visiting our Patreon page, patreon.com/BartholomewTown, where for as little as $3 per month, you'll be able to help sustain this program. That's patreon.com/BartholomewTown. Okay, so the Boston Globe's Dan McGowan joins us here on B-Town. And, you know, this morning you had a really concise, we're taping on a Thursday, the Thursday morning edition of Roadmap. It really had a nicely laid out kind of description of where we're at least in terms of the Democratic primary. My first question, though, and you indicated that you kind of saw the writing on the wall for Mayor Elorza to not be getting involved in this gubernatorial race. Why is that, and when did it really start to be clear to you that this was not going to be in Mayor Elorza's immediate future plans?
Yeah, I mean, I'd love to pretend that I'm, I'm such a visionary, but, to be honest and to be clear, I think I was surprised, as surprised as anybody, that he decided to call it quits or drop, decide not to run this early in the game. One thing that, I know a lot of other folks have, started to kind of float was this idea that maybe the mayor would run for, treasurer or lieutenant governor. And I've always thought that was very unlikely because, honestly, I think once you're the mayor of Providence, it's the only other jobs that are appealing enough that kind of appeal to your sort of the addiction to the limelight that you get when you're mayor of Providence. It's governor or the congressional seats, right?
Yep.
So I never thought he would run for anything else. And so with all the money and sort of, a guy who has a platform, who has something to say, I did think he would at least announce that he was running for governor, and flirt with it. But I will say, you started to hear in the last couple of weeks, number one, he had laid off a staffer who had come on board in the campaign. That's always a sign, something's going on when you're this quickly, telling someone to, they're going to be on unemployment. So that kind of thing. I know he had polled recently. And while he hasn't talked very much about it, it's been a very difficult, 6-8 weeks for Mayor Elorza. I can't imagine his polling, came back particularly strong. The only polling I've ever seen on him statewide came actually last year. And he was pretty negative even then, a year ago, right around election time. So let's say 10 months ago. And so, I think the writing was on the wall in some ways, but again, I should say, I did think that he would at least throw his hat in the ring, flirt with it for a while, and then, try to be the kingmaker in some ways and make a big endorsement, let's say next spring or something. Yep. So I'm very surprised that it happened this week.
I guess the other aspect of Elorza is he's sitting on a good amount of campaign cash. Do you see him as somebody who would challenge, whether it be a Cicilline or sit out for, if McKee wins, he will be in a 10-year run potentially, but do you see him floating around Rhode Island politics for another decade or so, and possibly it's going to be a while, and then people with short memories might not remember whether it's the Mike Stevens incident or anything else that has dogged the mayor over the last 6 to 8 weeks?
So it's a really good question, and let's kind of break it down two different ways. So do I think he'll play around Rhode Island politics for a while? I do. I'm not sure what form that will take, but to your point, with $1 million in your campaign account, he can be a major player. I mean, if Jorge Elorza wanted to, he could be leaving office and he could sort of spend enough money to help elect 8 city council members and have, even from a distance, have a majority of the city council kind of, with his vision going forward. So, that's what $1 million can do for you. That would, by the way, you'd have more than enough money to do, a lot in city politics. Think about it. Over the last 6-8 months, he's become very supportive of charter schools, things like that. So I think he'll have a presence in Rhode Island politics. One thing I'd say to keep an eye on 4 years from now, or I suppose 5 years from now, Peter Nerona will be term limited.
Yep.
I think Mayor Elorza, he's an attorney. He's a former housing court judge. I think he really would like to take a potential look at the Attorney General's office as a potential thing to run for. I think there's a lot of people that are going to hear this and say, "Boy, that's crazy." But again, he's an activist. He really enjoyed the only time that he ever felt comfortable as mayor of Providence, in the spotlight was those weeks and months after President Trump was elected, when he was, out there all the time. He kind of hit his stride. He likes that sort of activism. So don't rule out running for Attorney General in a couple of years. And then you're right. The longer this goes on, look, I remember Angel Tavares getting beat in Providence by Gina Raimondo in his Democratic primary as the sitting mayor.
Yep.
And a few years later, there are people still right now who are knocking down Mayor Tavares' door to say, "Hey, you should run for governor. You should try this. You should think about it." So you can always make come back. You can always have some sort of role in politics. So I don't think he's done by any means, but he's going to have to pick real smart spots, because he's leaving office, or he'll be leaving office with very few kind of A-list supporters, right? Not a fan. Legislature's not a big fan of his. Certainly the statewide candidates don't love him. So, he's going to have to take some time off, maybe take some breathing, take some time to breathe, become a professor, do something. But I do think you'll see him back just because he has that much money.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, the Attorney General spot. That's something to definitely watch for, and it does make a lot of sense. Pivoting to Seth Magaziner, obviously the big rollout this week on Broadway in Pawtucket. A pretty good amount of elected officials and other, I guess, politicos around, everyone from Thomas Cutes, from former head of the union at RIPTA, to Brandon Potter, the member of the Rhode Island Political Cooperative that was on hand, and just a number of different people. Of course, the big story, the big takeaway was Magaziner not taking questions at the end of his big announcement presentation. I guess that'll fade away in a little while, but right now it seems like he can't escape that. Was that a big mistake on his part?
Yeah, I think it was. It was an unforced error. The one thing to remember, it's an unforced error, there's no doubt. So period, stop there. The one thing, though, is go then read the next day's coverage in the Globe or in the Providence Journal, or really any of the news outlets. It's a passing mention that he didn't take questions.
Yeah.
I don't think that the Seth Magaziner campaign is really beating themselves up over not taking questions. It looks bad. It got us all riled up. Certainly, it's been something talked about on talk radio a whole bunch, and so it's a legitimate critique. It was, just flat out, it was not very smart. But to your point, no one's gonna remember this, a week from now, let alone a year from now.
He's someone who's not in favor of defunding the police, or any of, I guess, the bullet points that some would say would qualify you as a progressive candidate. Does he have the material makeup to win over the progressive base in Rhode Island? Is a viable candidate, is somebody who can actually take on the sitting governor and Secretary Gorbea?
I think it's the biggest question going in this race right now. Especially now with Mayor Lorz out, and I wrote this in Roadmap today. Mayor Lorz was not going to be the next governor. I don't think he was going to win. But he was going to be a factor in the race. He was going to pull people to the left. He was going to make people take strong positions on some of the things that he's done, reparations, universal income, controversial issues if you're trying to kind of be in the moderate lane of the Democratic Party. I think Seth Magaziner, the thing that he's been very good at is, as treasurer, is he just doesn't make a lot of enemies, right? Pick school construction as his big issue. Virtually nobody opposes, certainly in the Democratic Party, opposes, school repairs and school construction. He picked that as an issue. It was safe. It was the right thing to do. He likes to, he's going to stake out your very standard progressive or Democratic positions when it comes to guns and things like that. But for certain folks, on the left, and I think use people like State Senator Sam Bell, certainly far to the left, they do many times have a litmus test for what matters and for who they'll support. Defunding the police or reforming police departments, that's going to be an issue. So he's going to have to kind of dance around and figure out an answer on that kind of stuff. He's going to have to have a better, more clear position when it comes to taxing the wealthy, things like that. I think there's always a chance that he's not going to be progressive enough for a lot of folks in the Democratic Party. But keep in mind, right now, if he is the kind of viable alternative when it comes to fundraising, big name, to the incumbent governor, certainly you're going to have to make a choice. If you lean further to the left, do you love the current governor, or are you willing to give someone like Seth Magaziner a shot? Now, question becomes, where does Nellie Gorbea move? Does she try to make the move far to the left? It's not her style in a lot of ways. She's pretty, I would say, moderate as well, but there is a lane here. Somebody will probably be grabbing at that progressive mantle in the coming months.
Yeah, I've heard over the last week from two entirely different sources that the Rhode Island Political Cooperative is definitely going to put forth a candidate in the gubernatorial race and also in pretty much every state office race. And the likely name right now is Matt Brown. Now, he had a very underwhelming effort, if you will, in 2018 with respect to Governor Raimondo. But does a Matt Brown getting in addition to the independent turned sort of progressive, he's got libertarian elements to his platform, but Dr. Luis Daniel Munoz, do they cannibalize each other? And do they have any impact at all if they're both in there and they're not able to consolidate the Aaron Regenbergs and Sam Bells and so on and so forth in terms of getting the several thousand people who are self-identifying as progressives out and knocking doors or making calls?
Well, suddenly the more people that get in the race, the more Dan McKee's going to feel good about it. I think Dan McKee is saying the more the merrier. I actually think, despite the fact that he doesn't love Mayor Lorza, he'd have liked Mayor Lorza to be in the race just strictly based on numbers. But you ask a really important question. I mean, how many folks out there are there? How many voters out there are there who are going to be, willing to support a candidate who is going to be extremely far to the left? Now, look, Matt Brown's an interesting guy. First of all, he has the ability to raise money. He's got some independent money that he can spend of his own. So, he's a factor. And depending on which point in the 2018 Democratic primary against Gina Raimondo you look at it, I mean, you're right. The result was pretty bad, right? Gina Raimondo easily won. But, I was there on election night, and I can remember 4, 5, 6 o'clock on election night. And I can remember being in the newsroom in Channel 12 and having the thought that, oh my God, there's a chance Matt Brown might win this thing. Yeah. People were on their heels in the Raimondo campaign. They were worried about, maybe not about losing, but maybe about having, God, what if it's a 5-point win? What if it's just, it's so embarrassing, that kind of thing. So, Matt Brown is certainly not a non-factor. And you bring up Munoz, who I think is really interesting. Look, he's going to struggle to really and truly break through in this race. He doesn't have the money and he doesn't have the campaign infrastructure to make that happen. That said, he is him. He's a very smart man. If he can get on the debate stage, if he can maybe win over a few of the mainstream progressives in this state, suddenly you're talking about maybe he's a 5, 6, 7%er. Suddenly now the pie gets a little bit smaller. Where does Matt Brown go from there? Mm-hmm. And again, it all comes back to, if there are 5 or 6 candidates in this race, really hard, Dan McKee would have to lose the race as opposed to winning.
Yeah, absolutely. And you think back to the Raimondo campaign television commercial, who is Matt Brown? This really dark music that the fact they spent money on that shows that there was concern, and it suggests that there could be, as a whole, there could be concern from the quote unquote more mainstream candidates about a Munoz or a Brown. Okay, lastly, Governor McKee, you've got the ILO group situation. We've got the Tony Silva wetland situation. There's concern that there is inconsistency of opinion between the McKee team and the Department of Health. Does he have the name recognition and the general appeal to ride the chair of incumbency, if you will, to victory? Obviously, there's a million political lifetimes between now and next September, but is he in a good position?
Yeah, I mean, on one hand, it's been a tough month. On the other, boy, if I'm going to have my tough month, I'd love for it to be August and September the year before a primary, right?
Yeah, right.
You get lucky potentially with maybe nothing comes of Tony Silva, on the sort of Attorney General's investigation side. I'm less concerned. I'll be honest. I don't think this ILO group thing, I think it's a total news story. I think it matters, but I don't think it's something that breaks through to the electorate. People hate consultants, but I mean, Gina Raimondo was the queen of consultants.
Boston
right?
Consulting basically designed our initial pandemic response. So that's how it is.
Exactly. And by the way, there's an argument to be made. And it's a different conversation that sometimes there's a reason why consultants are consultants, right? Yeah. They have a track record doing what they, doing good things or doing, being smart, whatever. But yeah, look, all this comes down to now with Governor McKee is how does he handle things going forward, right? Can't have too many more screw ups. And, let's assume that there won't be. Let's assume that there won't be that many more, significant mistakes that call into question any sort of credibility or, look like there's a dark cloud over his administration. So then how does he handle incumbency? One thing he struggled with, I think, in the last 6 weeks, kind of alongside some of the Tony Silva thing or the ILO group thing, is you just mentioned it, kind of feeling like maybe he doesn't see eye to eye with the health department at all times. He was a little back and forth when it came to masking in schools. He ended up landing on, I think, what most people would say is the right position. But where does this go from here? Is he going to prove himself as kind of a decisive leader, or is he always going to kind of be, a little bit wishy-washy? Look, he was a good mayor of Cumberland. He was a good lieutenant governor. He has every reason to have a lot of momentum. Some of this stuff could just be blips on the radar. And you and I could be talking a year from now, right before or maybe just right after a Democratic primary, where we say, well, of course he was going to win. There were all these candidates in the race. He was the incumbent. So, I would say if you're in Camp McKee and you really love Dan McKee, I wouldn't throw in the towel at this point. But definitely, I mean, he's not as strong as he was maybe 90 days ago. Mm-hmm. But who knows? 90 days from now, he could be, the far and away leader.
He's Dan McGowan of the Boston Globe's Rhode Island section. He's the columnist, really the state's columnist, no doubt about it. And you should definitely subscribe to Roadmap if you haven't already, which is free, and then go ahead and subscribe to the Boston Globe. Exciting stuff as always, sir. And let's see where this goes. It's going to be interesting.
Bill, thanks for having me. This was great.
Absolutely.
At HealthSource RI for Employers, we provide access to health insurance to more than 1,100 local businesses and nonprofits, and 96% of them renew through us every year. Maybe it's our choice of 19 different health plans, our 10 years of customizing solutions, or our one local team of dedicated experts helping employers find quality health insurance. See how our numbers stack up for you. Learn more at healthsourceri.com/employers.